Hello, y'all, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Namaste Y'all. My name is Dr. Stephanie Boyce, and I am here today to talk about a subject that may be a little bit more sensitive. So I want to issue a trigger warning today. If you have experienced, been a victim or witness to sexual abuse, I just want to give you a fair warning that this episode may be a little triggering. Today, we're going to take time to talk about lessons I wish my daughter and young girls will have moving forward when it comes to sexual shame and sexual assault. And so when I started this podcast, I never dreamed that I would be doing this episode. Honestly, it just came to me recently, and then I started my research for the episode. So I'll give you a little background. So for me, thinking about this, if you listen to the pilot episode, I told you that I want this podcast to be a curriculum for young girls and women and in general, just about what it means to discover the self-love that you should have for yourself. A big part of that is reclaiming your voice and reclaiming your power. And so for years, I spent so many years in schools, in high schools, mentoring high school girls. I mean, some of my girls and my debutantes have gone on to graduate from West Point College and Clark and UT and like so many places, and now they're off in the world just being grown and doing amazing things, and I'm so proud of that. And so as I think about some of the lessons that I wish for them to take with them, in addition to now having my own daughter, there's so much that can be said about women taking on these ideas of sexual shame, especially from a young age. And so I think it's so important for us, especially those raising little girls, to start to dive into the bigger questions about what that does for the psyche of women. Because it just doesn't end when you're a girl, right? And so I think for me, I consider the roots of how I kind of inherited kind of like a cloud of sexual shame came from me growing up in the church. For me, in the churches that I experienced, it was just this blanket of shame around sex. Unless you're married, God is not pleased if you have a sexual thought, if you have a sexual experience, whether that be with yourself or with another person, whether it be heterosexual or homosexual. God is not pleased if you think about sex, if you entertain a thought, and then because if you entertain a thought, then it'll turn into something else. And it was all of this. It was this guilt and shame around sex that I feel like if I could just take that lesson and trash it so my daughter never gets it, like, I want that so much for us. And I think part of the issue that we see is when we, especially by way of using religion and concepts of God to create shame, not just sexual shame, but any kind of shame, we actually limit people in their capacity to grow and to be conscious and to be connected to the true divinity that exists inside of them. It puts you down this trajectory of always thinking about yourself as evil and dirty and wrong. If you have a sexual thought or curiosity, which we know scientifically is just a part of growing up. And so even mentoring girls in schools, I was always very conscious and aware to not shame them when they shared things with me, especially things that might have been sexual in nature. And so because what I noticed was a lot of the high school girls were less likely to talk to their parents and guardians about certain things happening to them, and things that they were experiencing with their bodies and with partners. And I just always would encourage them, just give your parent a chance or give your mom a chance. It's like, try to tell her what's going on. Like, my mama, I can't say this to my mom. And so the culture that we have created of this purity culture where girls should aspire to be perfectly set apart and untouched and all of this stuff, it creates a problem with our girls as they go along on their journeys. And so I would like to offer us, as we raise girls and women, to start to encourage them instead to become more in tune with their bodies, right? I think in Western religions, what we see is this emphasis on the separation of our body and our mental. Like they're almost disconnected. But really, the body does a lot to communicate to us things that should be said out of our mouths. And so one thing that I tried to do with my daughter, for instance, from the time she could talk, was to tell her, use your words, use your words. So whatever emotion you're experiencing in your body, especially you think about this in terms of toddlers, they might just start to, and you have to say, like, whatever you're experiencing in your body, nobody knows unless you say it out of your mouth. Use your words, we used to tell her. And so now my 5-year-old is a pro at using her words, to say the least. But also she has been given language since she was a little baby. And then a toddler. She understands what her private parts are. She understands that nobody but mommy and daddy should ever touch them, and what she should do if anybody ever touches her. She understands how to protect her body. I will tell her, even like she might be at the park playing with kids and have a situation, and you'll see sometimes where kids have a disagreement or something on a playground. And I had to almost coach her to the point where, she'll have a conflict with a kid and their first instinct is to run to you as a parent to fix it. But I would tell her over and over again, whose responsibility is it to protect your body? And she'll say, mine. I'll say, whose responsibility is it to protect Amari's body? She'll say, mine. Because the first line of defense that you have against somebody intruding on your body is yourself, right? And so she's been given that language since she was little, and I'm so grateful for that. And still I still have to check in with her, and there'll be times we'll be having bath time, and I have to say, hey, anybody touched you on your private? Has anybody touched you on your butt? And she'll say no or whatever. But to move to this place where we understand how to give girls language around, listen to what your body is saying and honor that, is next level. And for some of us, we were taught, especially by way of our religious beliefs and practices, to not listen to our body. I mean, it was almost the exact opposite. It was like, whatever your body is saying, put that down, shove it down, don't listen to it. And so the text for this episode is Anita Phillips' The Garden Within. Y'all, when I read that book, The Garden Within, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, she put so much language around what I could not articulate in terms of the psychological need for us to listen to our bodies and honor the emotions, right? To not put down our emotions as like they're a flaw, but to be empowered by, like, when we feel emotions, they are messages to us. And what message is being communicated? And how empowering could it be for us to teach our girls, when you feel something in your body, it's your body's way of communicating to you, but you have to give voice and words to it, to the world around you. I think it's so empowering. I remember, in terms of combating sexual shame with my daughter, when kids get to a certain point, they might start to feel sensations, whether you're bathing them or they're playing in the tub or something. And I just remember early on telling her dad, when she has a moment where she might put her hand on herself, or she might look like she's feeling something, if the water splashes a certain way, don't have a strong reaction. Because that reacting to, get your hand from down there, don't do that, it communicates that shame from an early age, right? And so I just remember, I heard somebody on, I think it was maybe Instagram or a show or something I was watching, a mom that said she sat down with her daughter in front of a mirror, full-length mirror, and both of them sat without their underwear on, for her to show her daughter in the mirror these were her private parts and what they were called. And I had a conversation early on with my child about the same thing. First of all, we've always used words that were anatomically correct. She's always known that that's her vagina as a girl. And so we've never used, friendly terms like pocketbook or whatever kind of kiki terms, because in a situation where your child has to articulate themselves, they need to be using the language, right? They need to be using language that is correct in any situation. And so I explained to her the different parts. That's your clitoris. That's your labia. And she may not remember those terms, but what she will remember, I believe, and we'll be having these conversations over the years, is that there is no shame in your body. In your body, there is no shame. God made you perfectly. And I tell her this all the time. If she sees me like coming out of the shower, she might say, yeah, mommy, yeah. And I'll tell her, it's no yeah. God made me perfect. Whatever you see, God made it and it's perfect, and God made you perfect. And if we could communicate that message, again, every episode I'm going to remind you, we have the opportunity to choose love or fear in any situation. And if our responsibility is to choose and to be love, because God is love, then to teach our girls to love themselves is such a big part of bringing them up. I just remember being raised with so much shame and guilt around how you felt and like whatever like was going on with you. And I just want my daughter more than anything to know, like, God made you perfectly. Like, and whatever you're feeling or whatever your body is telling to you, like, stop and listen and articulate and say what's true. But that's a practice that takes time. And then there's other settings that a child is going to be in where they're not going to be encouraged to do that. They're going to be encouraged to sit down, shut up, do what you're told, especially if they're going to schools, certain kind of schools. Sit down, do what you're told. It doesn't matter how you feel. You got to pee, hold it. Like these kind of things that we are taught systemically once we go like to schools or to churches or whatever institutions that our kids are involved in. Sometimes the messaging is the exact opposite. And so I think home ground is a good place to start with honoring the voice and the body especially of our girls. And I'm saying our girls because I have a girl, but I totally understand that this message applies to everybody, right? And so it's so important for me. So I wanted to start there, especially because as we are looking to girls getting older, I think this becomes especially tricky when they start to have curiosities about becoming sexually active, right? And so I like to say, if you cast this big blanket of shame over all of sex, doesn't matter if you're thinking about sex, if it's masturbation, if it's sex with somebody else, all of it is nasty and dirty and God is not pleased unless you're married. What you start to do is create a problem whereby there's a barrier now where there's something that this young girl cannot discuss with you as a parent or a guardian, right? Because you have cast a big blanket of shame over it. And they will then start to keep those secrets because they want to be the good girl or they want to not get in trouble or whatever it is. And so I want to start with that. It's my desire as I raise a young woman with voice and choice in this world to communicate to her what my beliefs are, and then to also bear witness to the fact that she will have her own beliefs. She will have her own beliefs as she grows up, and she'll have the right to choose and make choices about her body. And at the end of the day, what I learned in high schools is really low key. It didn't matter what the parents were telling the students. The students that I was mentoring, the students that I was teaching in classes, it didn't matter that their parents had cast that. The only thing that shame did is keep them from talking to you about what they did. It didn't keep them from doing it. They still made the choices. They still had the curiosities. They still explored whatever was happening organically in them and their hormones and all of these things. They still did it anyway. They just because of the shame did not have an avenue to share and be mentored and led by their parents as they were making and navigating those choices. That was always very important to me. And so for me, I like to encourage parents, and this won't be for every parent, but for those whosoever will, to help our girls understand that when it comes to exploring sexually, there's two choices, love or fear, that can drive that decision, right? I have seen and witnessed young girls who made a decision about sex based on fear. Well, he said, if I really love him and we've been together for this long and he's and they're making a decision, not because of being empowered and feeling like I really love this person and this is somebody I want to explore with in this way. But, well, if I don't, then somebody will. Or we were there and he was kind of, we had already been kissing and then he did this and I didn't really want to. And all of these fear-based decisions, if that makes sense, right? And so I want to help young girls and my young girl understand that making a loving choice and making a fear-based choice are two separate things. Right. And so for me personally, I will share with my daughter and the young girls that I've mentored over the years that my first encounter, even I felt like people where I was from, it was probably, younger than it should have been. I think they say your brain fully develops when you're like 25. But what I remember is that it was a loving exchange between me and a boy who was kind to me and gentle with me and patient with me. I still remember, like, it was raining outside. Like, it's crazy, but like, I remember these things. And more importantly, I remember how it made me feel. And I remember how that my body was prepared for it. And I was curious and I was consenting and all of these things. That loving exchange is a different thing than a fear-based exchange with someone where it's like the spirit of Seeley. I let Mr. do his business on me. Like, that's two separate things, right? And so I think it would behoove us to get to a place where we can get past the weirdness of the conversations. And, honestly, I've had some practice because of my, experience. But just talking to girls and hearing them express just these different experiences that they have. And so I think it's important for us to get to the place where we can open the door to these kind of conversations to help them understand I'm telling y'all, there was one debutante I had. She just, because of religious reasons, of course, she was swore up and down her and her boyfriend weren't having sex, but I was not crazy. Finally, by the end of the year when they got ready to graduate, her and this boy, they had been together forever, whatever. Those high school couples. And she finally told me before she graduated, I was like, I know y'all been. And she was like, oh, please don't tell my mom. She was so ashamed. Fast forward all these years, they stayed together through college. They got married. I ain't gonna say her name. They made it through college. They got married. They're grown now in the world. And like, they've been together. And I don't have a belief system. Again, I said in the pilot episode, my religion is love. I don't have a belief system that tells me that is something that God would consider dirty, broken, or wrong. They loved each other. They made loving decision based on the love that they have for each other. And I feel like it was a beautiful exchange between the two of them. Now they partner, they've been married now for a while and they live life. But it was a decision that she made, not a fear-based, somebody wants to do a thing to me, but an experience that she was having, a shared love experience with somebody. And I think that was a beautiful thing. I wish that if my daughter decides to make a decision like that, it would be based on love and not fear. But how fearful we have to be to not even have these conversations with our girls, especially when we know what's happening with teenage girls out here and we know the messaging that they're hearing. And so I really wanted to take time to open that door to that conversation. Maybe there's somebody who needs to be considering what you discuss with your daughter and what you don't, or your teenage boy, if you have a boy too. Because what I know is I'm going to transition now from when you have a blanket of shame over all sex. Also, what happens is girls are going to be less likely, or teenagers in general are going to be less likely also to communicate to you if they experience sexual assault. Okay, so if we think about it, casting a big cloud of shame over all of sex is not just about loving sex that somebody chooses to consent to and have an experience, a shared experience with somebody that they care about. It's also casting the shame over the person that is victimized, right? So in the same way that I don't want my child or any other young girl to be pressured into making a choice that they don't want to, I think it's also important for us to consider, and this is what I plan to tell my daughter when she's old enough to discuss it. There's never a situation in which a person should be able to leverage your body for their pleasure without your consent. Let me say it again. There is never a situation in which another person should be able to leverage your body for their own pleasure without your consent. It doesn't matter if they want access to your phone, or if they want access to touch your hair and you don't want them to touch your hair. It doesn't matter if they want to kiss you or to grope you or anything that you do not want. You have the right to say that. And it's a person's responsibility to make sure they have your consent, right? And so what I see a lot of times is if we don't create a safe space for our girls. Then it's not safe then if they experience some type of sexual assault for them to be able to come and say openly, this is what happened to me and this is who did it, without bearing that shame of, what part was it that I played in it, right? And so I want to tell for my daughter and for other young girls, I want to say for us growing up, I remember hearing people say things like, well, what did she have on? If a girl talked about being sexually assaulted, like, well, where was she? What did she have on? Why would you go over there? All these types of questions, right? That immediately shifts the blame to the victim of the sexual assault. It's like, do it matter if she had on a thong bikini or if she had on a sweatsuit? Did somebody decide they were going to use her body for their pleasure despite not having her consent? That's all that matters, right? And so I think those were the types of things that the patriarchy had us thinking. Like as a woman, I have to make sure I'm not only vigilant for my own self and my own, but I have to make sure I'm also mindful that if I wear the wrong thing or I do the wrong thing, that I might give a man a reason to need to not be able to control himself and then use my body for his pleasure without my consent. There is never a circumstance or a situation where it's okay. And so I want to make sure today, if you are a young girl, or if you're a parent of a young girl, I would admonish you to share this with them. The first thing is in our lessons for girls, when there are people that you are getting to know and you don't know them fully, don't go alone. This is my first piece of advice. It still doesn't make it right if they do it, but I would offer you, like I'm going to offer my daughter, whose responsibility is it to protect your body? If you can, yours. And knowing that, then I like to encourage girls, and I used to encourage them, don't go alone, right? I think about even as an adult now, I'm a grown woman. If I am somewhere, like let's say on a girls trip or something with my friends, and we were to like hang out with somebody or something, we too old for that now, my friend's married, but like there's never a situation where it was like, oh, okay, you met a nice guy, y'all go have fun, we going over here. Never. And now that I think about it in hindsight, it's just like, where you going? We going. We all going, right? And it's unfortunate that you have to think about it in that way, but especially if it's not a person that has earned your trust, right? Usually time will show you that has earned your trust and your respect, such that you can be going somewhere with them alone. I would say always go at least with a pair. And we're talking about like if you're meeting a new guy, or you're going to do something socially, like going to a party, like try to go with someone else if you're going to be meeting up with somebody, okay? The second thing is when your body speaks, open your mouth. And open your mouth and articulate what's going on. Because the internal cues that your body is giving you, those emotions that you're feeling, I like to say that red light that starts to blink inside when somebody is trying to lean in to kiss you or try to do something, like a gentleman or a person that is considerate and well-meaning will typically respond to your nonverbal cues. You pull back, you withdraw. They also pull back like, oh, you good? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to offend you. Like, you okay? Like, you want me to? Typically. Anybody that doesn't respond to your nonverbal cues and continues, you have to verbalize what's inside your body. You can't just, because sometimes your reaction will be to tense. You have to verbalize. You have to breathe and verbalize. And I like to offer this to young girls. Start with a no thank you. This is the assumption that this person just doesn't know by your verbal cue that you want them to leave you alone. It's the verbal backup. No, thank you. A no, thank you to try to give them no, thank you. You know, it's a good place to start with a verbal cue. Now, your verbal cues might have to go up, to cussing levels, depending on how that person responds to the verbal cue. But a no, thank you is a good place to start. 3 is to physically defend yourself. This is why I think it's a great idea to put girls in karate, jiu-jitsu, boxing, somewhere where they have been trained how to physically get somebody off of them. Because it shouldn't be this way. But again, like I tell my daughter, whose responsibility is it for you to protect your body? Is yours. And to the extent that you can, I want you to be prepared to be able to do so. So in the same way that we want to prepare them mentally, and scholastically to go out in the world and compete. And like, I want to prepare my daughter physically to be able to protect herself. Now, me, I just learned how to fight on the streets because where I grew up. But, you know, we got our kids in different kind of environments these days. They ain't just learning how to just fist fight, and mine ain't, at least, depending on where you are. Like, you got to physically put them in somewhere that's going to teach them some hand-to-hand combat. Like, you got to know, if I say no, thank you, and he continues to persist, how to get somebody off of you. What you need to do? What's the fastest way to let them know? What are some particular areas I need to go to get somebody up off me that might just give me a second to get free, right? You know what I'm saying? To get out of there. It's a means of protection. So the next thing I would encourage young girls and women to do is to report immediately, no matter what the person tells you. No matter what the person tells you, they say, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you. You know what I'm saying? To immediately report. To immediately report to your parent or guardian. And this is the part that I was just talking about earlier that gets tricky. If we have casted a big cloud of shame, then you're going to have a situation a lot of times where, especially with a girl that has been taught, you know, what did you have on, and don't tempt men, and that whatever happened, it was probably her fault. So she's gonna shut it up if she survives, she's gonna shut it up. And so I would encourage young girls that get this, that see this episode, if you ever have a situation or you've had a situation, to report immediately to your parent or guardian what happened. And this is another thing that we tell my daughter all the time. You don't let anybody touch you. And if they do, who do you tell? And she'll tell you, I tell mommy and daddy. I tell mommy and daddy. Again, it's just about trying to regulate these things and make them a regular part of our conversations. The last thing that I would tell a young girl is to expect the adults in your life to hold the person accountable. Expect adults in your life will hold the person accountable. This is the tricky part, especially in certain communities. People want to protect and give cover and make excuses for Uncle Bobo and why he did this and that. And I will say, at the end of the day, expect that the adults in your life will hold people accountable. And so in 2018, I was actually watching the Kavanaugh hearings. Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh was being accused by somebody he went to high school with of sexually assaulting her when they were in high school. And I remember I watched the hearings, and one of the news reporters came on. One of the news commentators came on after the hearing was over, and she was talking about how all of her friends, if she asked them, had a story of being sexually assaulted. She was like every woman in her life. And I just remember watching this, and this was after the Me Too movement and all of that. I believe it was after. And I just remember thinking, does every woman, maybe some unwanted advance or unwanted touching, she started explaining, or a situation where somebody did something and maybe you let them, but you didn't give them consent and they did it anyway. And as she was explaining it, it brought to my memory that I had been sexually assaulted when I was in high school. Not that I had forgotten, but that it was one of those things that I had not discussed or really dealt with like since then. And so for the sake of this episode, I am going to say that what I did at that time was, this was in 2018, I found the person on Facebook, and I sent them a direct message, and I basically said who I was and that I remembered what this person had done to me. It was not a situation where it's like, oh, you're dating someone and maybe y'all were kissing too heavy and maybe he touched you and you didn't want it. I feel like those situations are tricky, still wrong, but tricky. This was a grown man who had access to children. He was not an employee of my school. He came in to work with the choir. It was a gospel choir at that. And he would come in, and he was the director of our gospel choir. So he had access to all of these teenage girls, both there when we were on campus and when we traveled in hotel rooms. He was a grown man, and he should not have had access to us, but he did. I think because it was gospel choir, one, and because his nature was very jovial. He was always kind of goofy and laughy and kind of lighthearted, that he was unsuspecting for a lot of people. But what I will say, because I'm not going to go into the details of what happened in the incident. I also don't want to have to talk about this again, but I felt like for the sake of this episode, it would be disingenuous as I was doing my research for this episode. It was brought to my attention that he may still be working around kids. Now, in 2018, I sent him a direct message. I told him who I was. I told him I remembered what he did, that if I ever got wind that he was working with kids again, whether it was at a church or at a school, that I would report as a certified administrator and advocate for kids, that I would report him. All I know is I said what I said. And so I found out, in doing my research and preparing for this episode, that, again, like I said, he is still being given access to kids. And for that reason, I have to say his name was Terrence Mackey. And he worked with us and other churches and other choirs, and he's a musician and all of those things. My message to him in 2018 was that I hope you have repented and turned from your wicked ways. Perhaps that era of his season of his journey of pedophilia is over. My intention here today is to stand in the truth of, I cannot tell my daughter and other young girls how to stand in their truth and honor their voice and defend themselves and make this world a better place without saying what's true. Because all I can think about now is, it's been so many years, and I wonder how many other young women have been impacted by the fact that the shame, not just me, but other people that I know that were sexually assaulted by him. The fact that when I think about if I would have told my mom, like, the first thing I know she would have said was like, what was you doing over there? And it's like, I also think like I probably would have got in trouble. Like maybe I would have got put on punishment, because it was like, you shouldn't have been over there. But the real question would have been, why did a grown man groom you and invite you to his apartment? That should have been the question. And now as a grown woman, I understand that. It's past the statute of limitations. My intention is not that he would be prosecuted or anything for what he did to me. I understand the way the statute of limitations work. I don't want any money. I wouldn't try to sue or anything. My only intention here is to protect kids. And this is a platform that I have created to share my journey towards self-love. That journey has to include honoring my voice and saying what's true, especially if it is going to be the means by which this person will stop getting access to kids. I think for this episode, it's important for me to say his name here, to give voice to my experience, and to also ensure that if there's anybody that's working in a position of power, that they keep him away from kids. And if you are a parent that sees this and your child is around him, and you're giving him unfettered access to your child, whether it's in a church building, in a school, or on the road, going to competitions and other things like that, that you don't, or that you go with them. Because I think targeting young girls that did not have a father present in the home may have been something that was a part of what I believe was the trend. So I did not tell my mom. Because I didn't want to get in trouble, and I had just the shame of all of it. I walked out of there that day saying like, oh, okay, I'm a smart girl and I should have known better. Like I shouldn't have went over there. And I've never experienced that again, ever, not through college, not as an adult, but also I think I see now on my journey to self-love, how I was always hyper vigilant, not just for myself, but even for the girls that I mentored and taught in school. Like, you going where? You going to do what? Who you going with? Take a friend. No, don't go by yourself. Don't go. I was always hyper vigilant about that. And now I realize that as a trauma response. But even like in my sorority, like like when we would go on trips and we would do things, it would be something as simple as like going to the restroom, like going two at a time, like just that safety precautions. And what that looks like in my life now and with my child, where I will ask her, very pointed questions about, what's going on down there? You okay? Like, anybody touched you? And she can articulate, nobody touched me, blah, blah, blah. Or who went to the bathroom with you? Or did you wipe yourself? Or did somebody wipe you? And so I say all of that to say, if you are a young lady or girl, I hope you will take my pointers today into consideration. If you are a parent, I hope that you will go about the business of how we approach our daughter's sexuality and sexual shame in a way that honors them and empowers them and not disempowers them. Again, this episode was a little heavy. I was not prepared to do this one when I started Namaste Y'all, but I thank you for listening and for allowing me today to choose love over fear in my sharing. And until next episode, which will be a lot lighter episode, I hope. Namaste, y'all. Have a good one, and thank you for watching. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Namaste, y'all. If you haven't already, be sure that you follow us wherever you get your social media fixes. And also make sure you check out our upcoming community events because we want to connect with you, not just in the virtual space, but in person. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Namaste, y'all.